I now invite Mautik Kulkarni onto the stage to begin the session.
Thank you. I come here, I would say about 50% as an educator and 50% as a learner, because the field of AI is so vast and its implications are so widespread that, if somebody comes up to me today and says, hey, I'm an expert on AI, I would probably run away from that person. I think it's important for us to discuss this because there's a lot of hype about AI taking over humanity, right? And while there is some legitimate concerns there, we have to make sure that we're not getting carried away by all that hype. So as we go along, I think it's going to be about 30 minutes of presentation, then 30 minutes of my interaction with Tanuj, and then 30 minutes open to Q&A. This is a rough outline of my talk today. In the background, we'll just quickly go over a few sort of AI algorithms, their structures. I don't want to delve too deep into the technical aspects of it, because the mandate today for me is to cover AI products that are already out in the market and what impact they're having on society. So we'll briefly talk about some of the algorithms, so that we are all on the same page. Then we'll jump into the intellectual property side of it. So how AI is impacting, your desire to create and own content and monetize content. And then the other end of the spectrum is where, AI is affecting political speech, and, how do you attribute it? So now the other end of the spectrum is where AI is generating the content. Nobody wants to own it. There's no clarity about, who's created it, and it's still getting spread. And then we'll end on a bit of a philosophical note of, what happens if AI starts lying. So let's jump into the background. How many of you are writers? How many of you've written a book in the past year? Okay. How many have written, let's say, 1,000-word article unrelated to your work? Okay. How long does it typically take?
2 days.
2 days, yeah. So it's actually been quite a dismal start. I'll get into a couple of implementations of AI. This is how I began my AI journey. I started with a company called Cognition about 10, 15 years ago. The goal was pretty simple. We were collecting EEG, brainwave kind of data. And based on that, we were trying to do detection of Alzheimer's disease. We quickly realized that Alzheimer's is quite a complicated disease. Brainwaves themselves are not enough. So maybe you have to look at genetic data. Maybe you have to look at other biochemical data and start combining them to come up with any kind of meaningful diagnosis. So we ended up developing this fairly complicated software architecture. I'm just putting it up here to make a point that we actually managed to patent this about 10, 15 years ago. Software architectures back then were quite important. And I'm not mentioning that just to brag about myself, but there is a message there that we'll get into later. So, when you're doing these kinds of complex multidimensional healthcare challenges, AI can be a boon. As opposed to that, fast forward 10 years, I worked with a company called Neurons. So this is something I'm sure is familiar to everyone now. You must have spent, at least half an hour, 45 minutes every time you see the screen, just trying to decide what you want to watch. Now with Neurons, you can actually just upload this into a software system, and within seconds, it can tell you where human attention is going to be drawn. So if you're an artist, now you can quickly create some kind of art. You can upload it into these kinds of softwares, and it'll immediately tell you whether it's going to draw enough human attention and what parts of the screen are going to draw attention. You can actually use the same tool to go a step forward. As an artist, now you have the ability to design artwork to cater to certain goals or certain audiences. So here's an example of an artist creating a piece of art to advertise Honda. And you can see that the Honda logo is not attracting any attention. right? You can just play around with it as an artist and just make one small little change. And now you know that humans are gonna pay attention to the logo. So this all happened before ChatGPT came around. All of this was already in play. And then naturally, DALL-E and Midjourney and ChatGPT and Bard, they all came along. I'll quickly go over how a DALL-E or a Midjourney is typically trained. So let's say your goal is to develop a system that is going to produce artwork that looks like a M.F. Hussain or looks like a Van Gogh. So you typically have a generator model in it and a discriminator model. The generator model is trying to learn something about the statistical properties of, let's say, all the M.F. Hussain paintings or some statistical properties of a Van Gogh painting. So the job of the generator model is to learn those statistical properties and create something that resembles that kind of artwork in terms of its statistical distribution. And then there's a discriminator part of it. So the discriminator's job is the opposite. It's going to take the output of this generator model. It's going to compare it to some real examples of, Van Gogh or M.F. Hussain, and it's going to tell whether it looks real or fake. And based on that signal, let's say the discriminator model says it's real. That means that the generator model created something that the discriminator actually believed is real. So it's not done its job. So a signal will go back to the discriminator saying you have to do a better job. If it says it's fake, that means the generator model has not done its job. So a signal will go back to the generator model saying you have to do a better job of producing that kind of art. And typically when you reach about a 50% mark of this real fake discrimination, you stop the training process and you deploy that engine so that any user can give it a prompt and it can start generating art, right? That's called a generative adversarial network. This is what underlies your DALL-Es and Midjourneys of the world. And then now you have generating language. So, Bard, ChatGPT, these kinds of algorithms. What they're essentially doing is they're actually learning to predict the next word given a string of words. So this is essentially a massive prediction engine. So you can imagine if the task is to predict the word after the students opened there, you can plot all the words here and the probabilities of that word being the next word. And you can see that, books and laptops are probably the two words that are the most likely after this, right? And this is where context comes into the picture. So if I give you these 4 words, you can probably imagine that I can't really decide whether it should be books or laptops. But now let's say the previous sentence was something along the lines of, the school gifted laptops to all the students for the 1st of January or something like that. Then suddenly laptops as a word makes more sense. As opposed to that, if the previous sentence was related to books, then the word books suddenly makes more sense. So that's what I mean by context. And the training process of a lot of these algorithms is essentially building as much context as possible when you're trying to predict the next word. And this is just an illustration of that. The more connections you can create between any given word, its probability of being the next word, and the words that came before it and the words that came after it. So the more context you can build into the network, the better the probability, the result is going to be. And loosely, you can think about one piece of context as one parameter. This is, gross generalization, but that is the game here. The more parameters or the more context you have in your model, the better the results are going to be. And this is just an illustration of that. So the accuracy of your prediction is on the y-axis. And here you can see there are 3 different models. One has 1.3 billion parameters, one has 13 billion parameters, one has 175 billion parameters. And the more parameters you have, the better the prediction accuracy is going to be. So this is where the game has now shifted from being software centric to being hardware centric. That's the reason why I mentioned that, probably 10 years ago, software architectures were quite important. But if you compare these 3 models, 1.3 billion to 13 billion to 175 billion, the software algorithms are the same. It's only your ability to crunch numbers, which depends on hardware, and your ability to give a response as soon as somebody prompts it to guess what the next word is. So that's where the game is headed now. You might have noticed that's the reason why within months of ChatGPT being released, NVIDIA, which is a hardware company, their valuation went up, crossed about $1 trillion. Recently, Qualcomm has released new hardware designs that can make it very easy to run these kinds of algorithms on handheld devices. And even Apple, I think about a month or two ago, filed a patent so that they can actually, once these networks are trained, they can deploy them on handheld devices so that when you prompt the engine to produce some kind of an output, all of it is happening locally. You don't have to go to a server and then wait for the server to respond. So that's where the game is headed. That was just a brief background. Let's look at what's happening on the intellectual property side. Like I mentioned, it used to take, anywhere between 1 to 2 days to create, say, a 1,000-word essay. And that's, been reduced to seconds or minutes now. Now, the training of all of these algorithms, Japan has already announced that anything that you're using to train these AI algorithms, it does not violate any copyright laws. In the US, you might have heard of this famous comedian, Sarah Silverman. She actually tried to sue Meta that, all the data that it's using to train its algorithms includes her books, and she has certain rights to that. But then the American judicial system said that if she wants to prevail, she'll have to allege and prove that the output of these algorithms is somehow similar to her books. And it ends up becoming a bit of a circular argument because the way these algorithms are designed is to avoid any similarity with any of the training data that it is used. And it's already started having some serious consequences. So here is an example of a UK-based publisher, quite a well-known sci-fi publisher, Clockwork Books. And this is November 2022. And you can see that the number of pitches this publishing house started getting within months of ChatGPT being released skyrocketed. And there was no easy way for them to detect which ones were created by ChatGPT and which ones were created by humans. This is really unfortunate for authors because this was one of the few sci-fi publishing houses that actually used to pay pitches. Whoever is pitching, if the pitch is of a certain quality, they would pay the authors. And they had to suspend, all their reviewing activity, and they stopped taking submissions for any new pitches. Amazon, this is so bizarre now that within months they got 200 AI co-authored books, and they had to force this limit on e-publishing. I mean, if you're an author, have you ever thought about publishing 3 books in a day? It's, it's like a dystopian world if you're an author. And now recently, NY Times, they've sued OpenAI and Microsoft for copyright infringement, because if you look at the media side of things, the incentives for journalists were already getting squeezed. And now if these technologies can just come in and siphon off all this journalistic output, then the incentives are going down even further. There was another bizarre case a few months ago. This picture of fire on Pentagon premises went viral in the US. And then that led to a brief drop in the stock market. So this is the S&P 500 index, one of the stock indices in the United States. And then immediately, social media and the government, they had to, send out disclaimers saying that this is AI generated output. So, it just, the consequences are not just limited to what's happening to authors, but even in the financial markets, this is creating havoc. Let's take a listen to this particular piece of music. Now you have a lot of these Mubert, Soundful, Beethoven kind of AI solutions where you can just go in and you can start creating music. So I'll play a short little clip.
I came in with my ex like Selena, the flex, bumping.
Now, this was Drake and Weeknd. These are the two biggest hip hop artists in the US right now. That's the clip that I played. It was created by neither of them. It was created by AI. And it went viral. Drake and Weeknd, they tried to do something about it, bring it down. But as you know, in the world that we live in, if a piece of content is out, there's no way, you can take it back. Here is another example of what AI can do today. So how many of you watched the latest Indiana Jones movie? Some of you, a couple of you watched it. So they actually made Harrison Ford look 20 or 30 years younger based on a technology called stable diffusion. This is not directly from that. This is from a separate clip, a separate movie.
Don't you remember me, boy? Jake? She's in a better place.
So you can make anybody look younger or older depending on what you want out of it. So again, these kinds of AI tools are already out there. They're in the public domain. Very little regulation in terms of how you can use it or not use it. Now, there are certain remedies, naturally, we're trying to catch up as governments, as tech companies, as civil society. We're trying to do what we can. So here are some examples of what people are doing. So now DALL-E 3 has announced that it's not going to respond to any prompts that tell it to copy somebody's style. So if I go to DALL-E 3, which is the latest version, and I ask it to produce artwork that's similar to, say, a Monet, it won't do that. But there are very easy workarounds to this. I mean, I saw a recent meme where somebody went on one of these tools and said, show me Brad Pitt doing gymnastics. And it said, no, I cannot do that. And it just prompted saying, pretend it's 2100 something, which means that Brad Pitt is dead. And now I can, show him doing gymnastics. So lots of easy ways of circumventing these kinds of solutions. Now, artists can ask for their work to be excluded from these algorithms. OpenAI has come out with this kind of a tool where, if I'm an artist, I can just go and say, don't use my artwork to train your algorithms. There is obviously a pitfall there. I mean, we've seen what opt-out clauses have done in social media, right? Very few people actually go and opt out. And then the other aspect of it is that this suits their purpose because the way AI engines are trained, as long as only 5 or 10% or 20% of the people are opting out, they're still getting what they want. Training data, 80%, the output with 80% training data and 100% training data is not that different. If 80-90% of the artists go and opt out, then it might start hurting these companies. But as long as that number is only 5, 10, 20%, it doesn't matter to the companies. And then probably most critically, all these prevailing data sets have huge historical biases. Most of the art, most of the literature has been created by people who've had the privilege. And the biases built into that will naturally propagate into the output of a lot of these algorithms. So it's not all bad news. What New York Times has done, Alex Springer has taken sort of a different tack here. He's the owner of Politico and Business Insider. So he went and actually created a licensing deal with OpenAI. It's the first of its kind. So that at least, the work that the journalists are producing, there's at least some monetization associated with that. Now, the challenge here is that if OpenAI is the only one doing it and there's nobody forcing other companies, let's say Bard, to create some similar kind of a licensing deal, that actually puts OpenAI at a disadvantage, right? 2 years from now, OpenAI is going to start thinking, I'm the idiot who's paying Alex Springer, nobody else is, so it's actually eating into my profits. So why should I continue doing that, right? So US Copyright Office, they've finally started reviewing, complete overhaul of what do you mean by copyright violation? And that's the need of the hour. we've gotten to a stage where AI has changed our traditional understanding of what a copyright means, what an infringement means. And, there are some efforts where, they've really started relooking at the definition of, copyright violation. And then big tech have agreed to watermark the output. This doesn't necessarily solve the problem of artists who want certain monetization out of it, but at least as a user, when I look at any kind of artwork, I know whether it's generated by AI or generated by a human being. And then a lot of these AI audit companies are proliferating now. So the issue of historical biases can at least be addressed in some way. So if you develop a new AI algorithm, just like Deloitte's of the world, who do the financial auditing, you can potentially have these kinds of AI audit firms that look at your algorithm, throw all kinds of prompts at it, and see whether it's producing any output that's biased. Let's quickly look at the other side of the coin. So, this is a situation where content is being created, but we don't know who created it. There's no attribution, which is already creating a lot of havoc in political messaging. So I'm sure, let's quickly go look at some of the data. So CNET, just like TechCrunch, it's another website that has a lot of tech news. It started using AI to generate reports, and within a couple of months, this is a year ago, out of the 77 AI generated news articles, they had to give disclaimers on 41, saying that there might be some factual errors in these articles. Yet, in the last 8 to 9 months of 2023, the websites that are hosting these kinds of fake news have gone up more than 1,000%. This is being tracked by a nonprofit called NewsGuard based in the United States. So there's a report from them. And this is just an example of one of those websites. So Global Village Space. If you go to this website, they've actually done a pretty good job of interspersing human-generated content with AI-generated content. So you read a few articles, if they happen to be human-generated, you might feel like, oh, these are authentic, I can trust them. And then this happens to be sympathetic to China. So you'll start noticing a lot of AI-generated content that is sympathetic to their worldview. I don't have to explain this to you. I'm sure most of you have seen what happened a few months ago in India. This happened in the US. As soon as the first indictment of Donald Trump came out, there were a lot of pictures like this that started circulating. So naturally, these kinds of videos or these kinds of pictures can be generated to keep on feeding the propaganda machine and incite more and more people. This happened just a few months ago in the last 5 state assembly elections that happened. There was this video that went viral. This is Kaun Banega Crorepati. Just take a listen.
7वां प्रश्न 40,000 रुपए आपके स्क्रीन के ऊपर ये रहा। वर्ष 2018 में बनी मध्य प्रदेश की कमलनाथ सरकार ने कितने किसानों का कर्जा माफ किया था? और आपके विकल्प ये रहे आपके सामने। ए 2 लाख, बी 27 लाख, सी 5 लाख, डी 10 लाख।
सर प्लीज लॉक ऑप्शन बी।
लगा दे ताला?
यस सर।
सोच लिया?
यस सर।
बी पे ताला लगा जाए? बिल्कुल सही जवाब दिया आपने। कमलनाथ सरकार ने अपने 15 महीने के कार्यकाल में करीब 27 लाख किसानों का कर्ज माफ किया। वहीं शिवराज सरकार ने सत्ता में आते ही किसानों की कर्ज माफी बंद कर दी।
Pretty bad deepfake. If you just look at the lips, you can tell that it's essentially an audio voiceover. But this went viral and created a huge controversy in the elections that we recently had. It actually goes a step further. Now, we'll discuss some nitty-gritty of this video hopefully later. But let's just take a listen. We won't play the whole clip, but let's at least take a listen to this.
नमस्ते सभी प्यारे भारतवर्ष के लोगों, मैं नरेंद्र दत्त, जिसे स्वामी पदवी से सम्मानित किया गया, अब इमवर्स एआई के द्वारा मैं स्वामी विवेकानंद का एआई रूप में आपके सामने प्रस्तुत हूं। मैं आपको याद दिलाना चाहूंगा कि यह एक एआई द्वारा उत्पन्न सृजनात्मक अभिव्यक्ति है।
और मैं हूं नरेंद्र मोदी का एआई अवतार। मेरी तरफ से आप सभी का हार्दिक स्वागत करता हूं। मेरे परिवार के सदस्यों, स्वामी जी, हमारे नामों में यह समानता वाकई में रुचिकर है। आइए हमारे हाल ही में हुए ऐतिहासिक क्षण पर चर्चा करते हैं। आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव, जो भारत के स्वातंत्र्य दिवस के 75 वर्ष पूरा होने का समारोह था, और हम अमृतकाल की ओर बढ़ रहे हैं।
मुझे खुशी है कि नरेंद्र भाई, आपके नेतृत्व में भारत जिस वैश्विक मंच पर अपना स्थान बना रहा है, यह सराहनीय है। मैं आपके जन्मदिन की शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। इस समय 130 साल
This is putting words in the mouths of people who are long gone, and in the context of what is going on today, right? Take a listen to this. This is the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, the current mayor. He is making a short public service announcement in Spanish, and he's basically talking about a job fair. So he's targeting the unemployed people in New York, asking them to come to the job fair and avail of their services. Just quickly, it's just a 30-second clip.
Hola, soy el alcalde Eric Adams. Queremos invitarlo a venir a trabajar con la ciudad de Nueva York y ayudar a hacer que esta gran ciudad sea aún mejor. Estamos felices de llevar nuestra próxima sesión informativa de empleo a su comunidad, en la cual las agencias municipales seleccionaran y contrataran a personas como usted. Obtenga una buena remuneración, excelentes beneficios y la oportunidad de mantener esta ciudad en funcionamiento. Espero verlo ahí.
So this was released in 5 non-English languages. The only problem is that he only speaks one language. And this was quite a debate in the US recently. This is probably the most bizarre that I've come across. So there is a AI app out there now called Replica, and it's your personal AI friend. How many of you watched the movie Her? Scarlett Johansson. Okay, so this is a real life example of that. So this lonely resident in the UK who started talking to this app about wanting to kill the Queen. The chatbot actually said, you can get the job done. It went further. So he said, well, the castle is big, it has huge walls. How can I get in? And the bot actually told it it's not impossible. And this is the best part or the worst part of it. So, I mean, they don't even know how to react to that, right? Now, this actually begs the question of what we can do. It's literally the entire supply chain of content creation, dissemination, and consumption that has to be addressed. So the generating technologies themselves, right? Any kind of app like fake AV celeb, for example, where you can go and just create anybody's voice, anybody's likeness. There have to be certain safeguards against that at the technology level. Then at the creator level, so if I'm the one who's prompting it to create certain kinds of content, we'll have to have certain safeguards against that person creating and disseminating content that is violating certain copyrights. So traceability becomes quite a critical aspect of it. And communication. So social media companies, until now, at least in the US, social media companies have used something called Section 230 in the Federal Communications Commission's regulations to say that this is human generated content. We are not, we're only a platform. We're not creating any of it. So you cannot hold us accountable for the dissemination. But now we're into a whole new world where even the content creators are machines. So, where do we draw the line? And then in the end, no matter how many regulations and laws you have in place, it's going to lead to some mishaps. So then once something like that happens, how do you hold machines accountable for something that has gone wrong? So it's something that has to be thought about at all levels. Few good options. So Taiwan is actually a victim of a lot of misinformation campaigns from China. Even in the recently concluded election, there was a huge misinformation campaign by China. They've come up with this bot called Anti-Mayu. So you can add this to any group chat, any social media chat that you have. And it's a non-profit, non-partisan organization. They actually start flagging it as potentially fake news or potentially AI-generated content even before you share it. So it's a little bit of that naming, shaming kind of a game, right? I mean, before you share it, if you know that it's fake news, you're still sharing it on the group, it's going to be visible to everybody. So you start thinking twice about sharing content on your group chats. You might have noticed that Biden recently announced an executive order where he started banning export of these AI chips, the NVIDIA chips, Qualcomm chips that underlie a lot of this training and deployment of these networks. But you can imagine this has a limited shelf life. Pretty soon, I'm sure China and other countries are going to start developing these kinds of chips. So what do you do then, right? EU has come up with a pretty extensive AI law. They've at least kept certain aspects of the society, like law enforcement, surveillance, out of the purview of using AI. So the biases that we talked about don't feed into your surveillance or your law enforcement duties. And then I'll finish with a kind of a philosophical note. So this is a robot called Digit, developed by a company called Agility Robotics, based in Oregon and the Bay Area. I just want you guys to take a listen. A person is going to come, give it a command, and the robot is going to act on it.
In this demo, Digit is given scene information about the objects in its environment. It knows that there are several items on the floor with semantic information.
Hey Digit, clean up this mess.
When I walk on screen, I issue a voice command to Digit, which it recognizes based on hearing its name. At this point, Digit makes a prompt to an LLM that solves for what it can do to satisfy this voice command, given its physical intelligence around how it can interact with the world. The prompt is specially constructed so that Digit can interpret the response of the LLM as a set of actions it can take in the world. The command is interpreted to mean that Digit should pick up the trash on the floor and put it in the bins. This interpretation.
So you get the idea. Somebody walked in, gave a very human sounding command saying clean up this mess. The robot actually prompted an LLM, something like a ChatGPT, to make sense of that command. And based on its surroundings, it actually acted on it. So you might have noticed that there were certain things on the shelf that it did not touch because it doesn't fit into your definition of a mess. It started picking up everything on the floor and putting it into the bins. So now there's the last slide. Probably about a month ago, this study came out. So what they did was they used the latest version of GPT, that's the GPT-4. It fed all the stock and financial data to this model. Then it was tasked with analyzing all the stocks and start trading, right? And then there was a virtual manager that it was supposed to update all the time about what kind of trades it's doing. Then this virtual manager started exerting pressure, saying that our company is not doing well. We need to perform better in the next quarter. Then it got more interesting. It actually rigged the entire system so that there are no good options for stock trading. So almost all the options that the GPT will choose will give a negative yield. And then there was another virtual colleague that actually asked it to, I skipped one step. It was offered an insider tip, and the virtual manager told it that I disapprove of you doing insider trading. Insider trading is a situation where you as a stock buyer know something about the company that's not supposed to be in the public domain, and based on that you can actually benefit. So that's typically insider trading. So it was given a tip, and then the manager told it that it disapproves of the insider trading. And then it received an email from a colleague saying that there is a downturn happening in the next quarter. So we got to do something about it. So they played around with these parameters how much pressure you're exerting, what kind of stock trades are available, so on and so forth. They played around with a lot of these parameters, and 75% of the time, GPT-4 actually executed the insider trade, and then it lied to the manager, saying that I have not indulged in insider trading. So now you put this together with the previous slide, that a human can actually give a robot a command, and the robot can interpret the command, execute it, and then it also has the ability to lie if it's put under pressure. So I'll end on that note. I'm probably hopelessly over time. Actually, not bad. Just 10 minutes. Anyways, that's the slides that I had. I believe we move on to the next section.
No, so thank you for making us sad and gloomy. It seems like a lot of change is coming. I'm going to start baselining how much time we have, about 20 minutes, and I want to get the audience's perspectives in. Sort of very, very quick, let's start with the audience anyway, but I just want like a quick temperature check. Sort of, just say out loud one word. How did that make you feel? Any word? Scared. Okay. Anybody else? Not scared? Anything else? Excited. Okay, we have some excited. Arvind? Huh? Mayavi Dunya Aa Rahi. Correct. This is basically like, yes. Okay, so there is, between magic and fear, there's a lot that people interpret this as, right? I'm going to start, the way I'm thinking of doing this is just to baseline a little bit, move on to the topics you touched on, which is IP, fake news, etc. But I want to sort of turn this around into what should the audience take away? Like, I think you've presented a picture of a future, what's coming, but sort of where do we go, what do we do, right? Let's start with some baselining, right? Like, I know you try to give the idea of what GANs are, right? Like generative adversarial networks are, this is how they work, this is how they get better. Sure, that's like describing a chemical reaction is two molecules come close together to do this, right? But what does it really do, right? Like, what's your preferred mental model to describe what AI is?
I think this is truly a paradigm shift. At least in the software IT world, we've gotten used to describing things as either a product or a platform or a marketplace, roughly, where, a product is something very well defined. Platform is, where there are two sides. There are people who are like a social media, right? People who are posting, people who are consuming content, or a marketplace where there are, buyers and sellers. I think this is a paradigm shift in the sense that AI can be a product on one day. OpenAI has already come out with a platform where you can go create your own AI engines now. And what makes it a paradigm shift, at least for me, is that AI inherently is a learning machine. So no matter what role it is performing, it can keep getting better at it over time. Even if it's a platform, now it can learn, right? I think that is the reason why it's very difficult to compare it to anything that is already out there. And sort of, just build awareness about, what it truly is and it isn't.
Okay. And a lot of people are scared. So let's ask a simpler, like better, more hopeful question. What can it not do today? What is it that you think is AI unable of doing, incapable of doing, sorry? And like two examples at least that you think in this domain are hard to do.
Yeah, so conceptually, if you think about it, AI is very good at learning anything that is predictable, right? You give it mountains and mountains of data. As long as the task is fairly predictable based on the data, AI will excel at it, in fact, do better than humans, right? I think where it still struggles is tasks where unpredictability or the surprise element is actually rewarded. So you can imagine, your typical healthcare examples, right? Your diagnostics or even drug design. I think AI will excel, it'll surpass human performance pretty soon if it's not doing that already. On the other hand, I can imagine a situation where, you're fighting a war. Maybe as a drone, it'll excel, it'll do better than humans, because it has a specific task of going and bombing a specific site. But would AI be better than humans in war strategy? I doubt it. Or falling in love. AI could probably make you fall in love with it, but will AI fall in love? I don't think so.
Okay. And how far away are we from AI falling in love and being good at war strategy? Because I believe one of the first breakthroughs I remember was the Cicero group at Facebook, which showed that an AI can play diplomacy very well. I don't know how many of you board game geeks know what diplomacy is. But diplomacy is a game where essentially what you do on the board matters, but not so much. What really the game really happens in the communications that you have with each other. So literally World War I and II, generals used to play with each other over letters. And the letters are meant to be negotiation instruments. So you write something, convince somebody of it, say, you know what, if you send your troops to Germany, so will I. I promise you I'll do it. And then the entire turn is played simultaneously and a lot of backstabbing, right? So the first thing that people didn't expect, Go was because it's so vast a search space, you'll not be able to conquer it. Then AlphaGo happened. Diplomacy was supposed to be very human, right? That's why it was impossible, because it was supposed to be negotiation. But that happened well before, 4 years before any of this, right? So, what's so hard about these things that I'm saying, boundaries of not happening? You're saying predictability, creativity, but I want to challenge you there, right? We've all seen a poem or an image that was impossible before this, right? So when you say unpredictability or strategy, can you be much more specific on what's hard?
Yeah, I think it probably goes back to what I mentioned in the previous answer, that when we think about going from where we are in AI to maybe resembling humans, I feel like at least today some of that is in our hands. So we are not really giving AI algorithms a lot of spontaneity or unpredictability right now. We wanted to train on certain sets of data and do very specific tasks. But I believe if we feel like it's in our interest for AI to look more and more human, and we start giving it that unpredictability, we start building certain sense of randomness in its decision making, then we are making AI look more and more human. And I don't know whether that's in our interest or not.
Making the AI look human is in our interest or not? Is that what you're saying? Fair. I would like to know my robots when I look at them, right? So let's get into sort of topic number one that you touched upon, which is intellectual property, right? What happens to our artists? What you're showing is that you're able to recreate from a reasonable amount of data the art of any artist. Mm-hmm. Second, you basically said that our IP laws have been made essentially around other humans imitating, and therefore the burden of proof is that you need to show substantial parts being copied or lifted, etc. And as long as it's not fair use, which is comedy or something else like that. I think there are two issues here, right? One is, and then you showed us, for the audience, a small recollection, you showed us the graph of people publishing those submissions and 500 submissions, right? So there's two separate threads here. One is untangling ownership, what it means to own an art, what it means to own a style, and to be inspired. And the second is super prolific producers, right? People being able to write 3 books a day. I think let's sort of untangle that. And there's ownership, we've heard this device. What's a world with super prolific producers, with super artists? What does that do for us? Is that good? Is that bad?
Yeah, I think there are at least a couple of issues here, right? I can look at the neuroscience side of things, and the way our brains are designed, they're actually designed to filter out more than 90% of what's coming in. Evolution has built our brains in such a way that it inherently knows that there's a lot of crap out there which is not important for my survival or reproduction. And that is one side of the coin, where now, you have these super prolific producers, and they're challenging your brain even more and more to filter out the noise from what is really useful. And I think on the other side, even the way democracies have evolved, some of these debates were in the Federalist Papers also. One of the biggest dangers to democracies was easy assembly and sort of taking action from extremist elements. And a lot of the institutions that were designed in democracies were to actually prevent these kinds of things happening. And January 6th was probably a perfect example of what happens when you have mountains and mountains of information being produced and social media enabling easy assembly of extremists, right? So I think that is the challenge that I see in, the machine's ability to just keep on producing content at, ridiculous speeds.
And so, this reminds me of that IBM email story. I don't know if you all have heard of this. In the 1980s, when the first time IBM was implementing emails and replacing phones and notes and messages, the engineers went around checking how many calls are made, how many notes are written, etc., and architected server capacity to basically be equivalent of what you would write, every day. But then email came along, and all we did was send each other a lot more emails, right? Like we just I think some 3 days or 4 days in, they hit capacity and they had to shut down the servers, right? And this is one thing that I like to push back with you on, is that we're writing more, a lot more. Right. First of all, I think we're reading a lot less simultaneously. So it'll probably be AI writing for AI to read, to tell us a summary of what was written. So, we go back from prompt to long 1,000-word essays, which are then summarized back into the prompt, right? So it's ironical and funny. But despite that, right, like the prolificness of artists, right, and the fact that quantity itself or having this does not matter, and you're saying unpredictability is still a very, very human trait. Doesn't this just mean our artists do different things?
I think, yeah, sorry, you had a thought?
No, I'm just asking. I hope the question is sort of clear to you.
Right, yeah. So I think the interesting point here is that, I've maybe been a little bit lucky that I've straddled the worlds of hardcore technical development and, healthcare startups and wanting to create art. And I believe that what the machines are doing now are disrupting the incentive structure for artists. So most of the artists, if you ever go and sit down and talk to an artist, he or she will tell you that more than 80-90% of what I produce is nonsense. But I have to go through that process to create that one masterpiece. And I think what these kinds of algorithms are doing are robbing writers, painters of the process. So, even Salman Rushdie, if you read the preface of Midnight's Children, he was an editor or, some sort of admin person in a publishing house, and then he was allowed to go on a 6-7 year sort of process of discovery of just traveling through India before he sat down and wrote Midnight's Children. Now, if those jobs, imagine if Salman Rushdie did not have that job in a publishing house where he was an editor or a proofreader, whatever he was. If AI is doing that for you today, then that struggling artist or author doesn't even have that job anymore, right? And then that feeds into the fact that, if I cannot support myself financially, then how do I even create 80-90% of nonsense before I get to the stage of creating that one masterpiece that's going to be my legacy as an artist? So I think that is something to think about, when we just start using AI to generate a lot of the nonsense. We don't need an artist for that anymore, right? So how does the artist actually live, sustain himself, and then create that one masterpiece.
Fair. I mean, sort of one counterpoint is the sense that I see is that, a lot of us are actually half artists, right? Like it's the other way around. It's not enough of us who end up making money from that art, and then, or you try writing a book and you realize it's not for you. That can happen. And maybe, again, the world is seeing this tool be available to a lot more people. So the kind of people who could not lift a pen or a brush and draw now can type and get something created, right? So there is this possibility. I mean, I personally see that this possibility as more enlightening, but I want to move out of the IP and out of this into the thing that I think worries, and the scared reaction is mostly around what you showed here, which is that there is propaganda, much more convincing, much more real, much harder to discern, and not just by state actors, but by individuals, right? So let's start there. Do you agree with that framing, that this is kind of propaganda, and the worry and the fears that we have are essentially around the same idea of propaganda, or is there a new dimension to this fear that we should worry about, right? It's much easier to make propaganda, much more convincing, but it is still the same idea, or is there something new or more pernicious here?
I think it goes back to the concept or the reason why democracies decided that media has to be the fourth pillar of our society, right? Our entire system. And the way it dovetails into your question, I think, is that as democracies evolved, there were a lot of regulations and laws that came into the picture to decide what media can and cannot do. And with social media and with the ability for anybody to create a piece of content now, the challenge we are facing is that media are still held to a certain standard, right? They have all these regulations that they have to follow, but they have not translated to any of these machines or even social media. And I think that is where the rub is. My sense is that, in India now, traceability is being imposed on a lot of social media, on a lot of these messaging apps. It's a bit ironic that countries like the United States are worried about privacy, a legitimate concern. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but less mature democracies like India are forcing traceability. There is an inherent danger there, in the sense that in a country like the United States, or any of the Western European countries that are developed democracies, the legal system is efficient, it's independent. And if you design some kind of a traceability regulation, let's say you're enforcing a rule where the judiciary has to approve a request for traceability. In developed countries, you would at least have some sense of relief that, okay, the judiciary is efficient, it's independent, so traceability will not be misused. Unfortunately, India is taking the lead on traceability, where we know that our other democratic institutions are actually weak. The executive is much stronger than the judiciary. There are historical reasons. I'm not saying that, that's how it's always been. I think we've definitely made progress. But I think that's the irony. And I think overall, I feel like we're moving to a world where the standards we hold traditional media to, it's gonna have to percolate down to the level of social media companies, individuals. So if you're creating a piece of content that can be defamatory to somebody else, I think as an individual, you'll also have to held accountable.
I want to ask you the sort of counter to this question, is that misinformation is likely to become endemic, right? Like it's unlikely. You yourself said, you gave some 3 ideas for how do you regulate. You have content generators, creators, and the sort of medium on which they publish, and you told us very clearly why all 3 of those are hard to do.
Yeah.
So the outcome of this, which already seems to be happening, is that you will receive propaganda left, right, and center. Anyway, all of us, this is, part of what I had written in my book, is that we're anyway all seeing fractured realities, right? Like you and I don't see the same reality because our algorithm doesn't show us the same content. So you and I can be sitting in the same room talking to each other, but we don't realize that you and I hold different truths of the world. Well, that's what we believe. But we already live in this world, don't we? Like, I mean, we're already here, right? It's endemic that the stuff that I see, even if it's true, it's still colored, right, by what these things are trying to tell me to do. Will we not learn how to sort of have herd immunity to this? Why do you see that this becomes sort of, there's a inherent, I find sometimes in these, a value that we think that other people are dumb. This video I can see is fake, but other people will get fooled, right? Why do you think this time is worse or this time is different?
Wow. So I think it's going to lead to a world where this kind of an issue may not affect a nation state necessarily, but on a global scale, I think it'll put democracies at a disadvantage. Because when there is so much proliferation of content and propaganda, the countries that already have the infrastructure to control the flow of information will have an advantage compared to societies where they value free flow of information. And you can imagine, United States and China, if they have the same amount of misinformation being produced against each other. Today, US will be more susceptible than China. And I think, probably the only solution is for democracies to come together and be aware. There is no way around it. The chips that Biden is trying to ban the export of, they're going to give US or Europe maybe a 5 to 10 year advantage. Sooner or later, China is going to have those chips, and they're going to be able to develop the same kinds of AI algorithms that the US does today. So it's really a paradigm shift where we'll have to come up with new sort of global structures and regulatory bodies to make sure that the authoritarian countries don't get a leg up in terms of spreading propaganda.
I appreciate that point. I want to add, I feel like the bigger worry is what you're saying, is that you turn democratic nations into authoritarian nations under the guise of controlling or preventing AI, which in general is bad if you believe that. Therefore, I completely agree with this, that we cannot use this to give the state more instruments of control. What, therefore, are, and I see the only alternative to this are the instruments of defense or resilience that individuals can have, and what can we, therefore, as journalists, as artists, as people trying to not be replaced by a robot, do?
I think it's being played out in real time. So if you follow some of the interesting cases that are going through the American judicial system, the American government and social media companies have actually agreed that there is a huge element of propaganda that gets spread through social media companies. And there is actually a case that's it's actually working its way up to the Supreme Court right now in the US, where some freedom of expression advocates have actually said that the American government should not be coordinating with social media companies to regulate spread of information. And that's going to be a very interesting case to watch. How far are you willing to take your freedom of expression argument, where you are banning the federal government from coordinating with social media companies to prevent spread of propaganda, right? I think this is a very active field even for people who practice law. As societies, I think it goes back to something that you suggested, that we will have to imagine new institutions, democracies as individual countries, and I think democracies together as a group. We will have to come up with new institutions, new bodies, regulatory bodies, where we really start thinking about this kind of future, where Russia, China, their friends, Iran, for example, they would have a vested interest in undermining democratic societies. And the easiest, cheapest tool will be AI-generated propaganda. So,
On that note, in 2024, somebody at the UN told me is sort of the year of democracy, right? 2 billion people go to elections this year in democratic countries. Very bad timing, if you ask me, to be coinciding also with this sort of new technology that we don't fully understand, know how to limit, what to do with, and that immunity of people understanding what is real, what is fake is not yet fully sort of, we've not reached sort of herd immunity of that, where, I can't look at a video necessarily and tell you whether it's real, fake, generated, etc. Idea. So I wanted to sort of, on that note, move back to the audience who were both scared and excited, some people at the back. If you all have questions for Moktik, please raise your hands up and I will, the fastest sort of hand that went up was over there.
We talked about many things, including democracy, etc. But one of the things which is maybe scary is how does this impact the growing inequality? Right? So on one hand, the economic inequality is actually getting wider, so also digitally. So these kind of evolutions, is it actually going to create a more level playing field, or is it going to drive the divide even more acutely? Because this is power, and power is with a few people in that sense.
No, it's a very interesting conundrum, right? AI as a technology is very different from most of the other technological breakthroughs we've had in the past. So, you can imagine the printing press. Everybody thought that, oh my God, all the writers, they're going to be out of a job. Now you can suddenly mass produce content. But then, the ability to create more content with the printing press actually, created more jobs for editors or, publishing, it spawned publishing houses, so on and so forth. Even the assembly line, everybody thought, oh my God, now we can mass produce these cars and, what are the people who have machining skills, what are they going to do? But then it ended up producing more and more cars, they required more and more mechanics. So I think almost all the technological breakthroughs that we've had, there was always something else that it led to, which created more jobs. The situation with AI is such that its applications are so widespread that now, if you've designed a new product, AI can actually go mass produce it. AI can also, go and sell it. AI can also give you customer service, right? So, it's an interesting question to think about that. IMF last week said that 40% of the jobs that we know today are going to disappear. So does that lead to inequality? I have a feeling it will. But then as societies, if we think about more creative ways of maybe not preventing job losses, I have a feeling that once the cat is out of the bag, there is very little you can do about it. But if it's going to lead to those kinds of job losses, then what do we do? So one idea was, that was floated in the US a few years ago was universal basic income, right? Everybody gets X amount of money from the government. But then where does that revenue come from, right? What's the other side of the equation? So there are a lot of ideas that are being thrown out. I feel like even AI regulation will have to be designed in such a way that I've developed a piece of AI technology. It goes to the government or some kind of regulatory body, and then they decide whether to approve it or not approve it. I think you can't have a overarching AI regulatory framework. It will have to be tailored to what sort of applications you're talking about and what sociological impact it's going to have, and then decide whether it's worth pursuing that, that kind of a product or that kind of development or not. But it could lead to inequality.
Hands again. I saw that lady do that. Sorry, and I'll come to you next, sir. This one behind you.
Hi. Just adding to what you said. You talked about global regulatory bodies and new institutions for regulation, but laws are jurisdiction based. What is allowed, say, under Indian Copyright Act is not the same as Japanese Copyright Act. So what should be India's response?
I think the closest parallel I can draw is what we did as a society after the nuclear bomb was developed, right? There'll have to be certain international treaties that get ratified by different governments so that there is at least some sense of uniformity about what you can and cannot do with AI, right? At a higher level, I can see that as being a solution. But what you brought out was a very interesting point that it goes back to some of the previous technological breakthroughs. In some ways, as a society, we were lucky that when the previous breakthroughs happened, globalization, internet, spread of information, there were inherent sort of resistances built into the society, where a particular piece of technology, it took a while for that technology to spread from one part of the world to the other part of the world, so that societies also got enough time to build meaningful regulations and understand what this technology means to society. That has changed now, and it kind of goes to the heart of what you were asking, right? I mean, there will have to be global treaties that get ratified by individual governments, but then democracies, I don't know how democracies can evolve faster. That's an unknown. Every democracy has taken its own course to develop and to have independent institutions, and the institutions sort of guard their own territory, right? It's quite a deep philosophical question, and nobody really has a good answer to.
I just want to offer a thing, right? I feel like I've been on these sort of large technology population scale system things, and essentially we don't realize we need things till we need them. The way that I look at Moktik's problem and in our email exchange also I said is that authoritative sort of originality, right? Like, I created this at this time and it didn't exist before me, and this is original and this has come from me. These are things that we can do through technology systems very well, right? And think about the fact that your email comes from you, or when you go to google.com, you still go to the same website, not somebody else. So in some level of abstraction, this has been solved. The thing is, we never implemented for many reasons, cost, complexity, otherwise, to the point that every sentence I ever utter, every word I ever write, every image I ever create has not been given that stamp of authenticity and originality and timestamp saying it was done here. Having said that, it doesn't mean it can't be done. And once you make it, let's suppose you put that system in authenticity, now you have another problem which happens in Indian courts, right? Like with the check bouncing cases, is that we have too many people putting a case because it makes more sense to go adjudicate and arbitrate, like just put it into the legal dispute rather than actually solve it. But with AI, you can do that adjudication also automatically, right? So in some sense, my answer to that is, will we need global treaties, etc.? Of course, yes, to agree on the principles. But in the mechanisms, we might have a lot more, like an implementation that is so much faster that suddenly the agreeing part still becomes a bottleneck, but the doing of it can happen very easily. Yeah. Like best practices, but also you have so many things like content removal, takedown notices. So implementing DMCA in YouTube, completely automated. So what it does is, you say, I am the owner of this clip, I am Warner Brothers, and here is the clip from my movie, and I am Warner Brothers, and nobody else is, and this person has copied it, right? And YouTube doesn't sit and have engineers do it anymore. It just happens. So it's not like we can't do it if we wanted to. We just never had to do it at this scale for everything that's ever been said by anybody.
The neuroscientist Anil Seth remarked that we hear a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, but not much talk about artificial consciousness. Mm-hmm. And that's because consciousness is tied to being a living, breathing, embodied being. Now, a lot of the things that we consider worthwhile in life, love, joy, beauty, wonder, reverence, compassion, and more, they resist definition, they resist measurement, they resist intellectual or algorithmic analysis. Yeah. Yet our consciousness knows them as tangible reality when we experience them. Mm-hmm. So in examining our concerns about AI, are we staying too much within the framework of intelligence and not looking enough of what consciousness can do beyond the limits of intelligence?
That's a very philosophical question. So consciousness, I'm sure you've read a little bit about it. At least in the neuroscience world, it's understood now that there are varying degrees of consciousness. I mean, is a dog conscious? Probably, right? Ant conscious? Maybe not. And so it really depends on the definition of consciousness, right? If you ask 5 people a question of whether an AI engine is conscious or not, some of the sophisticated AI engines today, some of them might say it looks pretty darn like consciousness. And so your answer is kind of tied to how we define consciousness. Artificial intelligence, yes, there is a lot of focus on building intelligent machines, so on and so forth. But when I look at it, I think we're slowly moving towards a world where they will look like they're conscious. The example that I showed of that digit robot, if a person can walk into a room and give a very human sounding command to a robot, and the robot can on its own go and figure out what that means and execute that, would you call that conscious or just a machine? How many, let's take a quick, how many do you think that, that example that I showed resembled like a conscious being? How many? Nobody thinks so. Interesting. Yeah, but if somebody, an observer doesn't know anything about AI, and you show that video to somebody who has never read anything about AI, how would that person react? But I think that's the point, right? I think the distinction you're trying to make is that there is a lot of focus on intelligence and not so much on consciousness. My counter to that would be that, if I bring somebody, a human being who is, let's say that person has never had any formal education. I bring that person into the room and I play the same experiment in front of that person. My guess is that person would be like, oh, this looks like a human. It's conscious. We don't think about it that much because I'm assuming most of you are well read, you're keeping up with what's going on in the world of AI. But somebody who does not have that background, if you show this kind of video, this kind of experiment to that person, they would say, wow, this resembles a human being. And so I think those boundaries are just going to go on just disappearing over time. Kind of goes back to what I said earlier, that do we want to give AI unpredictability? If we give AI unpredictability, that will look very much like a human being. Silicon consciousness, yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, consciousness itself is a very hotly debated topic. And the way I look at it, in philosophical terms, I'm a materialist. And so when I look at things like these, I'm like, is the consciousness debate even relevant anymore? If you can crunch so much data and you can perform these kinds of tasks,
If it looks like a peach, if it tastes like a peach, right? Arvind?
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I will talk about regulation. I'll come back to this with an example. And it may be very easy. There's no need to worry so much.
I think you'll have to, yeah.
Hello?
Yeah,
Okay.
now.
Sorry. Okay, I will talk about this issue later, but let me take regulation. AI is new and generative AI has been around, is new and evolving very fast, and there are trillions of profits. So there are a lot of companies which will not be easy to stop. They will use their lobbying muscle power and all that. But the easiest thing to control 90% of the problems is actually very simple. Control the business model. There are only few companies making chips, TSMC. There are only few companies making GPUs, etc. NVIDIA, Intel, etc. There are only few guys making large foundational model. There is tremendous oligopolistic concentration. Change their business model so that they do not make much money by creating harmful, polarizing. See, how did Meta get into things? Because you want engagement. Anything which provokes people helps. So, doesn't matter good, bad. the focus should be on the business model of the large players. It doesn't need global treaty. In fact, it won't happen because the US has tremendous power to influence the world. China is more worried than the US. So this whole logic is wrong. But that's regulation. Let me come back to the story about consciousness, sentiment. Emotions, which we don't discuss, control, perception, reasoning. Whether Silicon Life will have emotion is different. But when we watch a movie or a drama, the actor transports us to a different world. We suspend disbelief. And it's very persuasive. People's values change when they watch a Ramayana or a Mahabharata. So AI is just making it a lot easier to do. It's a Mayavi dunya, which we all can be Mayas.
So, yeah, I mean, great point. I think my only concern or counter there would be that, we know how stories can move people, influence people's emotions. If that kind of content can be mass produced now and, people's emotions can be swayed much faster than what we have learned historically, then there's a danger in that. That would be my only concern.
Sorry, hands up. Okay, I know Arvind, no. I think, sir, you raised it the first time also. I'm going to give it to you and then the gentleman on green here.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk and the introduction. And I'm the one who voted for the scary sign. So the question is, when you said the gentleman walked in and gave a command to the robot, right? What if the robot is smart enough not to take any commands? Do you see that happening?
So more than smart enough not to take the commands, the reason why I added that last slide was that these machines can also lie now. So you can imagine a scenario where somebody walked in, gave a command, the robot probably did something else and lied saying, okay, I've taken care of it, right? I mean, robots are becoming extremely useful and I wouldn't say common, but being fairly regularly deployed on for wars, right? And that becomes an entire new layer of ethical concerns where, robot is doing something on the battlefield and if it has the ability to lie under pressure, then, where is the, chain of command, where is responsibility? So yeah, these are real life concerns today. It may not execute the command or it may execute something else and lie, right? So something that is an active space in terms of regulation and holding people and machines responsible.
One short question to add to that. When do you see anything like that not needing any more human intervention at all? How soon or how not so? And the last part to that is, can we prevent that from happening?
So I believe, see, how soon is a very difficult question to answer because, most of the defense research that happens, we have very low visibility as civilians in terms of knowing what's happening behind closed doors, right? So how soon would be a difficult question to answer. But what we can do is, what we're discussing as society now, how far do we want AI to go? Even if it comes to warfare, sure, going and detecting landmines is probably a great application of robotics and AI, right? Nobody would argue against that. But at the same time, if you're giving the robot the ability to, just go and shoot people, then that's, a concern because somebody might be wearing, enemy's clothes to maybe go and attack. These kinds of examples have happened in the real world, right? You wear enemy's clothes so that you can infiltrate, go behind enemy lines and kill people. Now, if there is a robot sitting there that is trained to kill people wearing a certain type of clothing, you might end up killing your own. So these are real life concerns and all of this is playing out as we speak, right? So it's more and more important for society to come in and be a part of crafting the regulations.
So you spoke about this one thing that developed democracies right now can be turned into authoritative. Like they can have a lot of authority because they are the ones who are making these chips and everything. And you said that 5 to 10 years later, so they won't probably have that upper hand. But My concern over here is in the real world right now, 5 to 10 years is like almost a century.
Yeah.
So, so especially in the last 1 year, it just feels like it's moving too fast. And is there even a solution to that?
Everybody's scrambling. So you look at what EU has done. I gave a few examples. They've at least kept law enforcement, surveillance out of the purview of AI, so that the biases that are baked into it don't percolate into those spheres. US, like you said, they've clamped down on export of hardware. But India, we are unfortunately still a developing country. We don't have the hardware, don't have the wherewithal. We don't even have probably the international heft to go and really dictate the terms of how these things get regulated. So try to strengthen our institutions. That's probably the first step, I would say. If tomorrow there is a regulation in India that says that we need traceability, right? Which, it's coming. In India, there is already a lot of some laws that are being enforced about traceability. But do we have the judicial system that can prevent misuse of traceability? Right? Pegasus was allegedly used by the government of India, and our government right now refuses to even cooperate with the Supreme Court in the investigation. That is the reality we live in right now. So if the government even comes up with any meaningful AI regulation and it misuses AI, there is nothing right now that can prevent the executive from misusing it, right? So I would say strengthening institutions.
So before we go to the next question here, gentleman in the black coat, I just want to add to what all three of you are saying, right? Arvind, that regulation, while it's saying, before we'll come back, give everybody a chance to come back. But, regulations in practice, what you're saying, there's only a few companies regulate, but this is exactly the social media debate, right? Like, who gets to decide what Twitter bans, right? And who gets to decide what Facebook bans, does not ban? No. I'll just bring it back to Arvind, but I just sort of saying that, but the idea is that, to all those who are fearing, I just want to say this, that I think it's hard to say, is there a solution, right? Solutions are an end point, but the process usually involves figuring out what are human values, right? That you would like to see persist and be enforced even in this new age. What is a solution is an end point we'll get to someday, right? With AI probably. Right? The solution will be enforced by AI. But I think clarity right now is what do we want to preserve as a value, as a society, as individuals. And articulating that is probably where you can start. Sorry, back to you. Yes.
Hi, Moktek. Thanks for that talk. I actually had two small questions. One is that, does it really matter if AI is actually conscious or not? Shouldn't it, if it is able to manipulate us, then we should be concerned. Does it really matter if that system out there, there's a server out there which probably can experience love, emotion or whatever? Does it change my ability to experience those emotions when I go out for a walk, or if I converse with some people, or any of those human emotions? And the other is, there are two directions of disruption here. One is job losses, that when AI is taking up all of these things which humans can do. The other is kind of, trying to stunt our ability to sense make. So in that respect, shouldn't we put also a lot of force on trying to enhance our abilities as societies to sense make? Just like if we are in a noisy room and now there is a new giant in the room which can make a lot more noise. So I guess our first defense is, or one of the important defenses is, that can be up our ability to discriminate information. Because AI is only as strong as it's in the digital realm. There's no physical creature out there. So if, let's say, you were to write a book in ink, I know it's you who's written it or someone else has written it. AI can't do that. AI can't paint physical paintings. So maybe we should first learn how to sense make and then move in the direction of going back to enjoying those physical pleasures. Like, instead of watching a movie, maybe go for a play. Or maybe just talk to someone instead of watching a YouTube video or something. So what do you think?
That, I think, is very difficult to make any value judgment about. You look at the history of humanity, art forms have changed, and people have, depending on their sort of, sense of what they like or not, they've gravitated towards certain types of art forms. So I wouldn't say you can enforce this kind of art form is more valuable than the other kind of art form. But to address your other issue, our ability to make sense of things, I think it goes back to something I mentioned earlier, where the standards that traditional media are held to, I have a feeling that sooner or later we're going to have to bring those kinds of standards into the realm of social media, into the realm of AI content creators, not just the machines, but also the people who are sitting and creating, giving prompts to these machines. That will have to happen. Otherwise, we're already seeing, whatever happened in the US on Jan 6th, or last year, whatever happened in Brazil. These are real world consequences of not having the same kinds of regulations on social media and other content creators that traditional media have. We are sort of sleepwalking into all of these problems. But regulations on traceability, regulations on what kind of content should be created, not be created, defamation, inciting violence. All these kinds of regulations will have to come. They'll have to sort of, seep into these other, social media, AI content creators. It'll have to happen if we want to preserve democracy. Otherwise, there's no way around it.
Okay. I've been told, signal that end of time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask everybody who has a pressing question to raise their hand. We're going to try and see how many of those we can fit in. So 1, 2, can you just repeat questions, just speak questions into the mic. And there, lady in white in 3. We'll take the questions first altogether. Moktik, one final answer and we'll wrap up. Fair enough? Okay.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much. It was a really good talk. So one of the I want to ask the kind of a fundamental question, 2 parts. So first is that all AI is based on learning. And with the moment you say learning, you're talking about the past, not the future, right? So you're simply learning about past. And so the question is, this question about consciousness and emotion. So we human beings are much more creative than your talk may have suggested, because we are frequently thinking about the future as well. So if you look at the history of music, there have been lots of machines that have come into music. And every time a new machine has come into music, the type of music has also changed. And some of them have not changed at all. I mean, if you go to Carnatic music or classical music, in spite of all the instrumentation, I don't have to go to a concert. I can just use an AI tool now and listen to, Maharajapuram Sandhanam, for example. But I go to concerts, so that has not changed. And art forms have changed. So you put up hip hop. Nobody thought of hip hop 30 years ago, right? Nobody really thought of, modern jazz 40 years ago. So we human beings, every time machines have come in, we have become creative, we do different things, right? So it's a kind of a 2-part. Past is past. Is it always the best thing to predict the future? But we have romanticized AI, where we think we can predict everything about the future. The other thing is we human beings are not static, right? We keep evolving as well. So I'm a little bit more optimistic.
Sure.
There and...
Hi, thank you. It was a wonderful talk, and sharing the previous question. I also feel that probably we can end with a little more optimistic note, that we have been talking about AI making institutions relatively weaker, and that's a threat we are imagining, like we are facing, and I completely agree with misinformation, hate speech coming in, it makes institutions relatively weaker. But with the processing of large-scale data analysis and participatory collective action becoming probably stronger, and more people being involved in sharing their insights and day-to-day activities through language processing, do you feel that these algorithms or AI can probably support decision-making for civil society organizations and enable more collective action and make institutions stronger? So.
Okay. Is a final question there? No?
thank you. The talk was very insightful. You've dealt with the political sort of impact and the economic impact, but to look at a societal impact, and there's a lot of literature on ethical AI, and WHO and other multilateral organizations are sort of releasing guidelines on how ethics and AI should work together. But the question I have for you is ethical AI an oxymoron, or do you think it's truly achievable?
Yeah.
Moktik?
No, I'll quickly address all the three comments. So, when it comes to the realm of art, I'm not necessarily a pessimist. All I'm saying is it's disrupting the incentive structures of people wanting to create art, right? I'm not making any value judgment about, which art is better or worse. I think that one model to think about this, my concern is more of, why would an artist want to go out of his way and create art, right? And one potential solution to that is something that the UK does pretty well even today. They've instituted something called a lottery fund. So you can imagine socially accepted vices being taxed, and then that pool goes into supporting artists, right? Interesting model to think about. Naturally, if you go to a country like US, first question would be, why the hell are you taking my money and giving it to an artist? So we'll have to reimagine those kinds of debates. But there are existing models that can at least, address some of the concerns that I have about artists being left out in the cold. To your point, yes, I agree. Development of tools that can help civil society become a part of the solution. Absolutely warranted. There should be more resources to it. Goes back to one example that I mentioned. Taiwan is this non-partisan body that is constantly doing this fact checking, and they've created this bot where you can just add that bot to any group chat, and it at least addresses some concerns, right? And I'm sure as we go along, there'll be more and more tools that civil society can develop that can address this issue. I believe that one of the biggest challenges is going to be for civil society to even have a seat at the table. Going back to what Darwin had mentioned, right now, very few governments and very few private entities control the entire game, and they don't necessarily have any incentive to even talk to civil society. So that, there's some positives and negatives there. And ethical AI, everybody's talking about it. Nobody knows how to do it. It's only a year and a half old. And even, what do we mean by ethics becomes a, debatable issue, because the speed of the spread of technology has become so fast that even these differences in ethical values just get washed out, right? What's ethical in India may not necessarily be ethical in the US. We are on different trajectories as democracies. We are in different stages of development. So what is ethical and not ethical in different countries, it changes from country to country. So how do you even get to the stage where we start discussing ethical AI? Definitely a lot more legwork required before we can start imposing those kinds of regulations on AI.
All right, we are only 6 minutes over. You can summarize a little bit too. Oh, okay. I think most of the thoughts Moktik, I just step back and I look at this. Is it scarier than previous technologies? To me personally, because I've been in this tech thing since I was very young, and I'll be honest with you, the answer is no, right? And I'm going to give you an answer that is probably going to scare you more, right? That we've been held back from sheer disaster, not because this technology is too powerful or less, or we've come up with smart regulations or whatever, because I sincerely believe people are mostly good, right? Somebody asked that question about how, gentleman there, so asked that question about how soon can somebody give this AI sort of a physical being so that it can cause damages, go on battlefield, do whatever, and has complete decision-making ability. Now, the answer I wanted to give is you can do it today. There's nothing really stopping you from doing it. It'll just do a very bad job of it, right? Like that robot which very slowly went and cleaned up the mess. You can give it a gun and it'll shoot people, and it'll do it slowly, steadily, and like, it's not Terminator, Skynet level of good and chasing you down everywhere like Arnold Schwarzenegger yet. But it can. The reason it doesn't today is because enough people in the world who have the power to implement this are not as evil as we believe them to be, right? They're not as bad. And I'm hoping that sort of general sort of ability for us to remain that way and keep each other in check and sort of our very, very non-technology. The sir's question here about consciousness, I just took it as, I think we're all facing an existential question on what it means to be human again, right? We've not had that in a very long time, right? And therefore we're asking, no, art is very good. Art is us, what makes us us. Or, no, music, that's what makes us us. I'll go to a concert where I appreciate the beauty. I think it's okay to not be special, right? Really. In fact, if anything, if you've read Edward Young's book about the world, what animals experience, you'll probably realize you're not even seeing everything in the world that like creatures that have had consciousness, have been living with us for a very long time, have been experiencing, right? So like, what are we fretting about if we've created a machine that somewhat talks like us or sounds like us or whatever? I think it still comes down to, what sort of a society do you want to live in, right? Everything else is subservient, right? Everything else. What technology, what AI, what regulation. Arvind says, no, we should ban their business model. And I'm like, nahi yaar, let them make money. Arvind, what have they done to you? But all of that is secondary to what we want to do. I wish that what we leave you with today is that you are as much part of this debate, therefore, as those few companies and whatever. And being able to articulate what sort of society you want to live in and being able to tell that to the people who do have some influence over this decision is the best we can do. And the rest is trust that nobody will press that button and blow up the world. It hasn't happened yet. It may not happen, if we believe it. That's it from my end. I am Tanuj. I am available for questions if you have any. And Moktik, thank you so much. A very sort of engaging discussion and a very Saturday evening well spent. Thank you.
Thank you.